This is Khatt Chronicles, design stories from the Arab world, presented to you in collaboration with Africa. My name is Huda Smitshuijzen AbiFarès, and I have with me today Golnar Adili. Golnar is a multidisciplinary artist and educator whose work explores diasporic identity. Drawing from her experience growing up in post-revolution Iran, much of her art addresses themes of displacement, familial separation, and exploring language. She holds a master's degree in architecture from the University of Michigan and teaches at the Persian School of Design in New York. She has participated in numerous art residencies, including the Rockefeller Foundation for the Arts in Bellagio, Italy, the McDowell Colony, and the Women's Studio Workshop. Her work has been exhibited at venues such as the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, the Q Art Foundation in New York, and Craft Contemporary in Los Angeles. She was a Jamil Prize finalist in 2021 and has received several grants and fellowships, including the Jerome Foundation Grant, the Pollock Krasner Foundation Grant, and the New York Foundation for the Arts Grant. Her artist books are part of over 50 collections, including the Iranian-American Art Museum, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, the Walters Art Museum, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Hi, Golnar, and welcome to our Khatt Chronicles Season 4. The season is focused on women designers from the Swana region, in particular designers that are featured in the latest Khatt Books publication entitled Revealing, Recording, Reflecting Graphic Women from Southwest Asia and North Africa. You and your work embody perfectly the fourth chapter in the book, which is about women in the diaspora that are navigating multiple identities and practices, and that are transgressing borders in their work and challenging narrow cultural and professional definitions. So could you maybe start this conversation by talking about your journey into the visual arts and how you have become fascinated by the Perso-Arabic script and the language and how you use it in your work?
Sure. It's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for doing this book and bringing us together. So my journey to visual art was a non-normative one and a kind of a journey of elimination. It was just not available to me, the idea of becoming an artist or a designer. You know, from my background and context, one should do functional things, useful things. And I the other thing was that I was interested in many different things. I love science, and on top of, being very artistic, growing up, I wanted to become a doctor, and once I almost was about to enter the school, I decided not to, because I thought that it would be really sad not to be creative in this very direct way. So I studied architecture because I thought it was a sweet spot between art and science. It taught me how to systematically think, and I think I'm an obsessive thinker and a very associative thinker. So it was very useful to be able to give kind of system to this thinking. But then once I started to work in architecture, it seemed not my cup of tea. And I was always doing experimental conceptual artworks, even in architecture school. But that was very much welcome there. But in the workplace, not really. So at 30, I was like, well, I either go on and try to be happy, or I just pursue what I love to do, which was also a process of discovery because I wasn't sure. And so I got this grant, travel grant from my architecture school. I proposed to go to Teheran to investigate the contrast between inside and outside spaces. Growing up, I noticed that, obviously, and suffered from it greatly. And so I went to Teheran, and I thought, if I get this grant, this is going to be my ticket out of architecture. It was a personal kind of wish and promise. So I went there, I hung out with a bunch of photographers, and I took pictures from inside and outside, and I started to mix them. And that kind of was the beginning of my understanding my own visual language and art practice. And I slowly because I had done already graduate school in architecture and had a master's and had spent a lot of time, energy, and money, I thought I'm just going to use fellowships and residencies to kind of give myself this education of becoming an artist and figure out my language in it. Now, 18 years later, it proved to be the way to go for me. And I'm really glad that I kind of delved into the unknown and took that risk. And, all my ventures into architecture and other things, I think that really as an artist, you use every experience you have. And so it was interesting. I'm really using my architecture background in my art practice.
Can I ask you, since the topic is about being in diaspora, whether you were born in the US or in Iran, or, what was your life journey like?
Right. So that is actually very informative of the work I do, because I work with personal biographical marginal history and very much connected to my own experience. We have also a non-normative story. My parents met in the U.S. in college, and they were part of the student association fighting against the Shah of Iran. And so they were leftist Maoists, and they had me, and the revolution happened, and we all went back to Iran in 1979, literally months after the revolution, to build this leftist utopia that we all know what happened to. My dad we were invaded by Saddam. My dad went to war. Then he had to escape because the regime wanted to also persecute him and imprison him. I was 5 at the time, and so he escaped to the U.S. Thank God he could get out in one piece in this really very dangerous journey that once he told me about. And so that kind of broke our family, because at the time the airports were closed and my mom was not about to jump on a horse and go through the snow in Kurdistan. So that's the journey that my dad took. So we had to stay in Iran, and the U.S. wouldn't give my mom visa because in the 80s it was politically very divided. Some back and forth, but mainly I grew up in Iran. That separation and that longing and all of that hardship really is playing a big role in how I do my art, because I really first and foremost look at my art practice and design practice as a way of processing trauma and healing and kind of looking back. And I have very deep memories from when I was very little. And so it's really interesting to kind of suspend my imagination in those memories and kind of bring them back. I have this, I keep wanting to go back there and kind of move things around. So it's interesting.
I want to add to that and push you further on this idea. When you went back, when you got your first residency and you went back to Iran after, I guess, being in the US for a long time, having studied and worked, how was that, confrontation with your past in a different context, in a different context? Iran had changed dramatically since, I'm sure, your memory of it.
Yes, but, the change hadn't been this dramatic that is now. I mean, we're talking post-woman life freedom movement, which is really an eruption of exactly this thing about contrast between inside and outside. Young women came out and said, we don't want this anymore. And so I haven't been back since. It's very surreal. But let's go back to the time that I did go back in your question. I hadn't been back for 7 years, which was a long time. And in that time frame, big things had happened personally to me. My father had passed away, and I just didn't feel like going back. There was something emotionally very difficult about that. And even though he was always in the US, but it was going back to the Iran where my father didn't exist in the world anymore. And I had many experiences. I had gone through really this coming of age, becoming an adult. I have to say it was really fun. It was really amazing. I was seeing Iran, Teheran, places I knew with a fresh eye, and I loved that. And that was very necessary, or it became a crucial thing, and rediscovering the culture and the spaces and the city and outside of the city. and relationships. So going back home is always very warm feeling because, you have this, language that you love to be surrounded with, and sounds and smells and food and people and relationships and emotions. So all of that gave me a new varied palette to work with.
Did you work on any specific project after your return, after this residency? What was like the first project that started to kind of, you started to explore these things, not only in memories, but maybe also the visual impressions you had?
Yes. So this trip was really very important, very kind of a turning point and a beginning point really for my art practice, because before that I was thinking of myself, I'm going to do architecture. And then this really changed things, but I didn't have any preconceptions of what I was going to do. What I did was literally take pictures, photographs of inside and take photographs of outside, and also record my journey and start to define what is inside and what is outside, because I said the free inside versus the watched and observed outside. And sometimes the outside of the city becomes this inside because you are free from that surveillance. And then sometimes the inside of the car becomes like an outside. And it's really interesting how I was looking at that. And once I started to cut them and literally mix them, not weave them, because I didn't want to leave anything behind. With weaving, things get covered. But with just slicing and collaging and putting it together, I was trying to show instantly in one frame the inside and the outside. And so you could see the contrast and do a comparative study. So that led to time studies of abstraction, because things became extruded. When I came back, I literally tried to put that into a book form to give it to my graduate school, where they had given me this travel grant from, to say, here's what I did. So that was my visual report was a book. And then that led to...
What was the title of the book?
I forget right now, but it's going to come to me and I'm going to let you know. It's been so long. It had to do with contrasting the inside and outside spaces. I mean, it was a small portfolio type book. And then I decided to make these collages that were literally in my sketchbook to more refined pieces that I could show in a gallery. And I had a gallery reach out from Teheran, and I thought that was the best place to show it because it was about Teheran. So I went back and I developed a series. I called I remember the title of the exhibition. It was called Naqsh Ghalat, which it's a type of design in a rug where you have asymmetry. So they call it the incorrect design, which I love that name. And I played with that idea when I was collaging because it was so systematic and so regular. The little bit of asymmetry or difference made, I think, was important in these collages. So that's kind of where I went with that. And then from one residency to another, I began to kind of develop these pieces. It went from that to looking at Persian poetry, because it resonated deeply with these familial separations that I had experienced. And it really resonated with that deep longing. And so that's when language was introduced into my work very organically, kind of looking at poetry. And ever since, I have not looked away from language because I just love it so much. I find this strange. We have this rule and signs, and we say we're going to all as a society follow, and then we communicate with it, which is so strange how we can even do that. So this decided on kind of set of rules called language just has fascinated me since.
In your work, you use very specific style of writing in some ways. Like it's for me, it's very connected to building blocks and architecture. Is there a kind of symbolic reason for that?
Yes. So I am I'm not trained as a typographer or a graphic designer, and that's really not, but I am interested in language and type and text. And I want to differentiate between calligraphy and stylized writing ways and just looking at text. The way I look at text, there are two things that I do. One is to investigate biographical writings. For example, my dad's archive of letters, my mom's letters that she wrote to my father, in that looking at like personal history and that separation, kind of obsessing over that separation, which shaped me. So there's that. And I take that and I analyze them in different works. And then there's the other way of looking at text, which is completely designed by me. However, making the module be a square. So kind of dumbing down and stripping the language into its architectural essence. Those two things they look different because the handwritten language that comes from biographical text is cursive and it's like drawing, whereas the other one, which is based on the square module, it kind of looks like Kufic, but if I were to kind of compare it to an existing style, but it's very, very bare and very elemental. And I'm interested in that. I just want to look at the architecture of the word.
Yeah, it also looks a little bit like, the dot patterns that you use for, if you do embroidery actually, or weaving, or even like pixelated typefaces, So I think it has a lot of dimension, but I like the fact that you bring it into a third dimension, that it becomes actually blocks, and that you've worked also on kind of this idea of blocks in your artist books. Do you want to talk about your artist books?
Sure. So I came to book arts through this idea of I'm just going to do residencies and fellowships as a way of educating myself. And if there was a residency that had a component that I could learn, I loved that. I always was very curious about book arts and like anything paper and layers. And so I had applied to the Center for Book Arts for many years and had gotten either rejections or became a finalist. Finally, the year that I was pregnant, I called them and I said, do you have a rotating committee? And the Center for Book Arts is in Manhattan, so it would have been very convenient to go, and they give you a whole year access to their studios and free classes. So it sounded really interesting. And they said, oh, yes, please apply. So I was like, okay. So I applied, and that year I got it. And that was really like when I took those classes, first classes in book arts, just fundamental folding and box making, I fell in love. And I said, I belong to this tribe. And the blog came back, as you said, you were really right on about the type that I, let's say, designed or I work with is square. And that looks like a pixel. And that is very contemporary. It's also taking this, this very lyrical language of classical poetry and making it contemporary in my mind, or having a fresh look for myself with it. And that language of zeros and ones and pixels was very interesting to me. So I had ordered these wooden cubes and I was playing with them. And then I abandoned that because I got busy and did other things. And then once COVID happened, I was cleaning out my studio and I came across these little blocks, and I was with my toddler and I said, oh, now that everything is off and quiet, I can do whatever I want to do. I gave myself that freedom and play, permission. So I said, oh, I'm going to work with Hafiz poems and like this one poem that I'm obsessed with and the verbs. And because no one is watching, I can do whatever I want. And so I did that. I put these verbs together and I was playing with them. And I was like, what if I make this really elemental? And at the time, my daughter was 1.5 or 2 or 3. And I wanted to surround her with the Persian alphabet because we couldn't really readily go to Iran at the time. And so I said, I'm going to make this very elemental. I made the whole alphabet with it. Then I said, I want to make it more specific. So I made Baba Abdad book, which is about just one sentence that the Iranian children learn in first grade. I did research on it, and it just, in a process and the time of 8 months, I iterated and came up with a form of the book and kind of fine-tuned it. And that was really a magical moment because things really came together. In researching it, I came across this man who had contributed so much to the first grade book, but was not recognized by the government of Iran. And so I gave him a place in the book. And then simultaneously, I was very much intrigued by my daughter's play, puzzle, and blocks. And so I took that model and said I could put imagery on the 6th side of the cube and make it my own about personal history and about that very difficult year in 81 when my dad left. And those 2 books, so they are really very much designed around this cube module. And they did really, really well. And I didn't think, especially Baba Abdad, which is, the other one is full of imagery, so people can relate to it. It's a puzzle, it's a game, but the other one also did well. And I guess it found its audience somehow. Yeah.
Well, you talk about, I think it's interesting listening to you, you talk about your mother, your daughter, so my question would be, has your gender had a significant role in your practice?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think I'm a deep feminist inside, and being one daughter and growing up with my mother and seeing how difficult life was, being a single mother and raising a child in wartime, 8 years of war, and the family being separated by these geopolitical lines. And it really, I think, deeply affected me. And I am always for the underdog. I am I truly feel for women and us and our work. So I think that, and also there are things that you can express in art that you just can't verbally express. And those are the things that I'm really interested in. Those feelings also that you can express and you can only visually express. So I've been really looking at how I can do that. And one place I found them in was in my mother's eyes. I think they told the story, and I wanted to bring that story to the public or to my audience, whoever that is. I never think about my audience, honestly. I think about what I want to express. And I think that if it's true and sincere, that it will touch people and be received by them. So, we have this expression in Persian, what comes from this heart sits on the heart. And so that's kind of been my motto. And going to architecture school and observing these boy clubs, of, people being in charge are always these men. And it just really bothered me. And it made me even more interested in expressing small stories of women and these marginal histories, and bringing attention to things that are not valued in the capitalist society, like the gaze of a woman who's been oppressed in different ways, or her words in a very intimate letter explored, right, and given a platform to. So giving my mother's emotions a platform and stopping over it and slowing down with it and exploring it, all those things I think are things that are connected to my womanhood, and that I really took pleasure in exploring, and I think that they are very important.
So you talk about that. I think it made me think of your work that was nominated for the Jamin Prize for the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was also about kind of taking these letters and abstracting them. So in a way, it becomes a sculpture and an emotional thing. Maybe you can talk about that work, because it had something very monumental. So something in a way it was masculine letters, but somehow they were feminine at the same time, because there was a softness to the work.
Yes. So that was a letter that my dad had written to his lover, not my mother. And I had originally worked with my mother's letter. And then I I looked and there was like tons of letters that my dad had written and had made copies of, as if he wanted to keep a record and as if he wanted to tell a story. And me being an only child and him not having a partner, it was like I needed to tell that story. It was very difficult. It took 10 years for me to like kind of gain distance from it and then explore it. And I chose that letter because it was the longest, very emotional. And I decided to extract the yeah. Looking at it, it really stood out to me. These yeahs formally are beautiful. They're soft. They're like waves. And they really spoke to me. So I chose them to be the consistent signifier. I took them out and I chronologically arranged them together. I didn't have to make too many choices about, in architecture, you learn how to give rules and system and then go by those rules. So it's very serial kind of approach. And so I took the yeahs. They already had lines because they were written in a line kind of paper. And then I just had to decide about how far I was going to put them. And then they created this kind of abstract poem of emotions and of my father's. Then I looked at that and decided to make it spatial and gave it very strict rules in order to keep the distances of the yeahs in the letter as they appear in the letter and spatially and came up with a whole engineering system. So they have scaffolds, they can be collapsed. They are held together with braces, X braces and straight braces. And so they made this, like wave form in space. And just to do that was really exciting, to translate from 2D to 3D and see their accumulation as if now they have a new life. And the yeah is really beautiful. It's the last letter of the Persian alphabet. It corresponds to the Y in the English alphabet. And our alphabets are very connected, actually, coming from Indo-European languages. And so I just thought that was really interesting. But like really, the form speaks for itself, and the cursive form was really beautiful to me. So when that was nominated by or accepted as when I was accepted as a finalist for Jamil, it got a lot of attention. It was shown at Victoria Albert, which I was thrilled to share it with the world. This very intimate story. Kind of coming out of the belly of a letter. So that was a beautiful moment.
That takes me to my next question to you, because, you work with these intimate artist books, you work on large scale, but it's also a lot of the work you're exhibiting is to a foreign audience, so to speak, or not necessarily a native audience, or the work is sort of a little bit out of its context. So did you ever do you have any interesting anecdotes about how people receive the work or interpret it, or what kind of good conversations you've had about it?
I've been just pleasantly surprised over and over again to hear that non-Persian speakers can connect to the work and really understand the underlying emotions of it. It's beyond my planning, really, and my wishes, because I just didn't know that, that could happen. But again, this thing I said about not worrying about the audience, I don't want to say caring because that's unkind, but because I really like to be generous and let people in as much as possible, but I don't want the work to be contrived because of it. So there is a fine balance of translation that can happen and explaining and giving background story, which I do in different contexts, like the catalog or sometimes in the title. But again, really going by that motto of what comes from the heart sits on the heart, I think that the way that you formally manipulate material and, make decisions about design, they all inform a deeper kind of level of the work, which is the emotional level, which is what I'm interested in. And so it's been really interesting to see those transliterations that happen, formal, visual, strictly visual. And I think that, the visual material and the way you handle it and everything just carries a lot of the message. But then, I do make the stories also available in different platforms that are, available, like I said, the catalog and so forth, or interviews like this. And so the non-Persian speaker has always let me know that, or communicated if they wanted to, that, those stories also are informative and they add the layers. Then you see, oh, this is where that thing comes from. But that initial personal reading without being informed about those things, I think is the first and the most telling kind of sign that this is working, that something is being communicated here that is touching the viewer. So in that way, it's been interesting. Now, of course, showing this work in a Persian-speaking context is even more gratifying, right? I came for the opening at the Jamil Center for this work because it traveled in South America after the UK, and then it ended in the Jamil Center. And it was just so lovely to talk to the audience there and see their reactions, because I felt like I didn't have to explain so much. A lot was just understood, and it was just so pleasant coming from here that I didn't have to put that extra effort. And that, people already knew, so that, I would love more opportunities to be able to show and have an audience in the East.
You mentioned earlier that, your interest in language, there is actually specifically for Persian as an Indo-European language. So it kind of relates to European languages in some ways. Do you find yourself sometimes like working with both languages, because you live in the US, but you're also I assume you're also very connected to your heritage. You're very Persian as well. So how does this dual personality or dual nationality or affiliation translate into the work you're doing?
I formally cannot respond to English language. It's such a big part of my thinking and also professional expression, because, I couldn't really speak about art in Persian because that's not the time. I mean, when I learned all of this here, so that's my professional language. However, my heart language is Persian. Mostly, you can say, yeah. And I speak Persian to my daughter. And, the form of the Persian language, which is really interesting because the roots are Indo-European, but then formally it's connected to Arabic, right? And so it's this in-between kind of thing. And the form of it, I just love this, the Persian script. It looks like drawing. It has smooth edges and it's very curvilinear. And I just love that. And then, the language carries so much of the culture and the inner world of, people who are made from that language. So it's really fascinating for me in that way. That's why I can't really engage with the English language in that way at all in my work.
I want to ask you, you described your process actually nicely, and you described, where you come from and its relation, how you came into the kind of work you are doing right now, and you're also teaching. So does some of your practice seep into your teaching, because you're teaching an American? I don't know exactly what you're teaching, but maybe you can talk about that. But also you're teaching in a sort of an American art school. So how does your work filter into that, or is that a separate side of your personality, of your practices?
I am a type of person. It's really difficult not to, infuse my work with my personal interest. But work is work, and you have certain parameters for it. I teach in two places. I teach children, middle schoolers, and that is my bread and butter. And I also have the opportunity that I'm grateful for to teach college level. And that is more intellectually stimulating because I can do more of the things that are a little bit more complicated and abstract. with them. However, the children have taught me actually a lot. I'm such a believer of, I could never make as good art as children do. Picasso said something like, you have to spend a lifetime to learn how to do work like children, art like children. So those two, I am very much, I'd love to experiment and research new ways of teaching and new artists for my kids. And that's the exciting part of it, always trying something new. How do you convey this concept to a child? But then also just researching new artists and new work is very fun. And then I teach also foundations, 2D foundations in Parsons School of Design. And in that, I really work with the concepts because thankfully they let me be very open and free and creative and do whatever I want to do as long as it fits within a loose boundary of 2D. So there is photographic, painting, and drawing. I'm not a painter really, but I try to bring in like expanded ideas about painting. And I always have a book project for my midterms. And I've realized that the 20-year-olds who are in undergrad really love the book form and redefining the idea of the book. So we do that together. Some classes are more successful than others, like always, but there's always paper and paper manipulation and redefining structures in it. So it's really about straddling 2 and 3 dimensions, which I love to do in my own work, and also showing some non-traditional printing processes that don't rely on the press. It's tricky, but we review, for example, hand printing with blocks, linoleum blocks, collagraphs, rubbings, and stamping, even potato stamping. Someone like Ruth Asawa did beautiful potato stamps that look very intricate and abstract and wonderful. And right now I'm working on, teaching tunnel books, which I haven't done many of, but I'm intrigued with. So that's a little...
Do you want to explain for the listeners what is a tunnel book?
Yes, a tunnel book is basically using the accordion as a spine, 2 accordions on the 2 sides of these sheets of paper that get layered on top of each other. And as you go deeper into the layers that are underneath, the opening cuts become smaller. So basically, you're starting with an imagery that it's mostly cuts, and through that cut, you're expressing an imagery of some sort. And then you have other, and then the layer after that and the layer after that, the cuts become smaller. So you can see, that's why it's called a tunnel book. You can see a whole progression of imagery in space, all at once.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any final words or thoughts you would like to share about, advice to young women, artists, designers?
Absolutely. So how I found my way into design and type and printmaking even in books is very organic. So it's like really not trying to fit a title, but trying to follow an interest. And I think that process is super important. Actual making is different from making in your head. And this iterative process of whatever comes to your mind, making it, and then deciding which way to go is crucial. And because your hand and the material will tell you something that you hadn't conceptualized in your mind, right? The subconscious can really seep into the process of the hand in a way that you can't even imagine. So just keep making, keep working, and any idea is valid. You just have to make it and see it, and then decide from there and go from there. I also remembered the title of the book that I made when I first started my journey into art, and that after that, a travel grant to Teheran, and it's called Teheran, A Landscape of Compressed Freedoms. And thankfully, because of the woman life freedom movement, now it's less compressed and it's more kind of just flowing in the society. People are out without hijab and just doing civil disobedience all the time. So I'm very inspired by that.
And hopefully getting away with it without too much trouble.
Yes, and slowly changing. I mean, the system just cannot go back to what it was.
This is fantastic. I didn't know that. This is news to me.
Oh, it's
super news.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of bad news coming with pollution and prices and political stuff. But this is really interesting. It's happening. So
okay, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Golnar. This was really wonderful to listen to your story, and thank you for sharing it with everyone. I really enjoyed our conversation, although I let you do all the talking. Hopefully I didn't interrupt too much.
No, it was a total pleasure, Huda. Your questions really were very, very awesome. So it was a pleasure.
Thank you again, and have a lovely day on your end.
Bye. Thank you. You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening. This was Khatt Chronicles, design stories from the Arab world.